The second skill that I think is important is what would be more traditionally called the drop step. And this is a longer range attack. What I just showed a moment ago with lowering your level is fine when you're in very close to your opponent, because you're basically dropping down, and the distance I can travel is basically how far my knee can come forward. So as you can imagine, that's a fairly close range attack. There are other times where I need to cover more distance because my opponent's further away from me, and this is where the drop step comes in. This would be considered a longer range attack, and we'll be going over how these apply into the future DVDs as far as attacking doubles, singles, high crotches, etc. Another thing that's important as far as the drop step is, as you can imagine, if you're fighting NHB or mixed martial arts, the distances are going to be typically greater than in wrestling, and that's a big difference actually that's important to be aware of. So your ability to travel the distance quickly, being able to traverse that distance between you and your opponent is critical, and be able to do that quickly is critical. Now, how to do this? First, I get in my stance, and what I want to do is I want to lean forward slightly. When you start a sprint, you're not going to start it casually, and your weight's not going to be on your back leg. If you want to get off the blocks quickly, you're leaned slightly forward. And that's how you should begin your drop step. We'll be talking some more about other principles, but that's a very, very important beginning to this type of technique. Actually, I mentioned before my weight is here, but with my heels down. Before I start my drop step, my weight ever so slightly gets pretty much just to the balls of my feet, because I'm starting my momentum forward and I'm trying to be deceptive about it. My opponent typically isn't going to respond to a very slight movement, even though my whole body is starting to move towards him. Next, one thing that's critical, and beginning wrestlers typically make this mistake, do not move back first. There is a tendency to want to come back and then to come in. One, you increase your distance, and two, you increase the time it takes to attack your opponent, both by virtue of increasing the distance as well as starting to back up first. So it's very, very important before I do my drop step, which again we'll be demonstrating in a minute, but I want you to keep these principles in mind, that I can be leaning slightly forward as I begin to initiate that attack, and I do not want to first back up. I do not want to first back up before I'm going to come in. Next, what's important is think about moving small muscles first. If I can begin the motion with my hands, which are small muscles and I can recruit them more quickly, I'm going to get in closer to my opponent more quickly and hopefully more deceptively than if I use bigger muscles that tend to be slower in takeoff and also probably more easily perceived by my opponent, because it's a more of a gross motor movement. So when I begin my attack, I've got to lower my level, and I'm going to be leaning slightly forward now, and it might be hard to see on the tape, but this is my stance. When I start to attack, my weight is shifted forward ever so slightly, so my momentum is coming forward, and then I'm moving my hands out. That's getting my momentum going forward even more. My momentum started going forward when I started leaning slightly forward. My hands are going to begin to help launch me into my opponent. And it's almost as if, my analogy I use is like the Alien series, the Alien movies, when the mouth comes out. That's how your hands want to strike out very quickly, because that's going to cover the distance. And almost think of like in a cartoon, where part of the cartoon character launches out and the rest of them gets dragged in behind them. Your hands are going to be that part that goes out first. Okay? And that's going to help you be a lot quicker. We're going to be talking about doing things quickly and how to do them more quickly, and that's an important point and concept. Next thing is don't retract your arms. Just like I don't pull back, I don't want to pull my arm back to, one, notify my opponent that I'm about to attack, and two, to increase the distance between my hands and his legs. So, just like you wouldn't punch somebody by first pulling your fist back, you don't want to attack with your hands by first pulling them back in preparation. And a lot of young students, when they're practicing and learning wrestling, tend to make that mistake. You need to have your hands come out. You need to have them come straight forward, never backing up first before they begin the attack. Another thing that's very, very important is don't drag your foot. Most people who are taught the drop step are first taught to drop their level, which of course is correct, step forward with the front leg, almost like a fencer's jab. Lower my level, step forward. Now watch this knee as it hits, and watch this rear foot drag on the mat. And then I come up to my frame here. In this position, I'd have, say, if I was shooting a double leg, I'd be around the back of his calves in this position. Now, why I think that is a terrible mistake is it slows you down. Nobody drags their feet when they run. You wouldn't do that because it would slow you down. And likewise, why should you drag your feet when you're doing the drop step? So, when you practice the drop step, what I want you to do, or to consider doing, is when you drop this knee, when you drop your hips, and you step forward, and this knee comes down, this leg here should simply come up. That, in my opinion, is critical. And there's another thing that's critical with regard to speed in attacking. You can only go as quickly into your opponent as your rear leg can follow up. For example, if I'm running, I can only go as fast as I can lift my rear leg up to put it forward. I may be very quick with my front leg when I run, but if I'm not picking my rear leg up quickly, I'm going to be slow. So, another thing to consider as you develop your drop step. I'm going to lower my level, and this is how I want you to think about it. Lower your level. When this knee comes out, when I step, and this knee comes down, my goal is when this knee hits, this foot has got to hit the mat a millisecond behind it. Boom. Most people, when they practice this technique of the drop step, make these two errors that I've been just talking about. One is that they drag their foot, which slows the attack down. And the other is that even if they don't drag their foot, there is a long period of time between when this knee hits and this foot comes up to a frame. Your goal in terms of getting in is to be able to bring this knee down quickly, and this foot has to follow up almost immediately. It's almost simultaneous. Next, don't blink your eyes when you attack in. A lot of people, when they're learning to do takedowns, when they're attacking, there's a tendency to shut their eyes initially. It's important that you keep your visual attention on your target the whole way in, just as you would if you were boxing or punching or kicking. That's very, very important, to keep your eyes on your target the whole time. Next, it's important that your momentum goes through your opponent during the drop step. Kind of get in stance, please, Colby. Okay, kind of stand over here. Yeah. When I attack, I want to lower my level, and I want my momentum to go lateral to the ground, or even a little bit up if that's possible. I do not want the trajectory of my attack to go down into the mat here. I do not want the mat or the ground to absorb my attack. I want my opponent to absorb the attack. There's a couple things that are important in being able to do this successfully. One is you have to lower your level before you begin your attack in. If my hips are high and I try to lower my level simultaneously, the trajectory of my attack is down. So I have to lower my level first, I have to lower my hips first, and I go in to attack. I lower my level, and when I attack, I come in. Now, the second thing that's important is I want to try to make contact, at least when we're talking about the double leg, and we're going to get more into that in another DVD that goes over the double leg specifically. But in any of these type of drop stepping motions and movements, we want our momentum to go through our opponent. So one, lowering your level is critical. Two, having contact with your shoulder at his lower abdomen or across his belt line prior to, if possible, or at least simultaneously with your knee hitting the mat is what you're striving for. I don't want my knee to hit, even if I lower my level here, I lower my level and I attack in. If my knee hits first, boom, and I try to drive through, a lot of my momentum and power gets absorbed by the mat. So what I'm going to try to do when I attack is lower my level, and when I attack in, I want you to watch, my body is going to make contact with Colby at about the same time my knee hits the mat here. And you'll notice, if you do that, you keep the momentum through your opponent. Again, we don't want the momentum to go down, get stuck in the mat. I want to go through my opponent. There's another very important principle that this helps you with, and that is, I'm going to be much more successful with my movements going forward than my opponent is going backwards. All things being equal, and when we go over some other attacks and future DVDs as well as defense, I'm always going to be trying to, at least most of the time, going forward and making my opponent go backward when I can. I'm much more competent moving forward, I'm stronger in that position, and he's weaker if he's going backwards. So, in review, to do the drop step, which is probably the technique you're going to use more in mixed martial arts, no holds barred type fighting situation, because our stance is going to be out further, okay? I need to cover more distance. We're going to start in the wrestling stance though, but the point here is this is a little bit longer range attack than the last one, which was just lowering my level here and trying to come in, boom. This time I'm going to lower my level, I'm a little further out. And now when I come in, I want you to notice my hand, I lean forward slightly, my hands are going to start the motion. Now come in, boom. Let me do a couple of those. I'm not doing any setups now, I'm not concerned about that. We're going to go over setups in a little bit. I just want you to notice going through your opponent. And I do that by lowering my level first and making contact with him either simultaneously when my knee hits the mat or alternatively and better just prior to my knee hitting the mat. So my momentum is going through my opponent. Again, my recommendation would be to practice these techniques, particularly as we go over the stance, in the more traditional wrestling way, and focus on keeping your level low right from the get-go, even though this may not be the type of stance you would use, for example, if you were actually fighting. Stick with the root and the more traditional way of wrestling, keeping your hips low as you're learning your drop step and as you learn these basic attacks. Then, when you feel comfortable with that, then you can start learning to lower your level from a more upright stand-up stance. And you'll probably at that point have enough confidence as well as proficiency to be able to lower your level. But if you skip that step, my suspicion is that you'll probably be shooting in a trajectory that's going to end up going down towards the mat and will be likely ineffective.